Stephen once lived a peaceful, ordinary life with his wife Sophie, but slowly everything changed. Resentment grew inside him as he felt misunderstood, unappreciated, and trapped in a life he no longer recognized. Small disagreements turned into full arguments, and his heart drifted further from his home. Kimberly, Sophie's cousin, visited often. She was warm, beautiful, and easy to talk to. Stephen found comfort in her presence, something he no longer felt with Sophie. Over time, the boundaries blurred. One careless afternoon, Stephen crossed a line with Kimberly. They kept the affair hidden, pretending nothing had happened, but guilt lingered. When Kimberly later gave birth to twins, rumors spread through the village suggesting Stephen might have been involved. Nothing was confirmed, but the whispers grew louder. This secret would soon spiral out of control, becoming the spark that ignited chaos in both families. Guilt twisted Stephen's heart, but instead of confessing, he numbed himself with alcohol. He came home late, drunk and angry, stumbling inside with a bottle barely held in his hand. One night, overwhelmed by frustration, he lashed out at Sophie. She tried to calm him, but he erupted, shouting cruel words poisoned by guilt. In his drunken fury, he blurted out the truth: his affair with Kimberly, his frustrations, and the bitterness he felt toward his own life. Sophie was devastated. The next morning, she traveled to the village to confront Kimberly. With blazing anger, she demanded answers. Kimberly, ashamed and overwhelmed, admitted her mistake. Her apology fell on deaf ears. The betrayal was too deep. Villagers gathered around, listening and whispering. Rumors turned into dramatic tales as people exaggerated the story. What had been a private sin became a spectacle for the whole community to feed on. Soon, Dan, Kimberly's husband, heard the rumors. Shocked and wounded, he confronted her. Kimberly, already overwhelmed by humiliation, told him she could no longer stay. Dan begged her to remain, insisting he still loved her, but she felt suffocated by shame. She packed her belongings, gathered her twins, and returned to her parents' home. Meanwhile, Sophie left Stephen as well. She returned to her family with her child, leaving Stephen alone to face the consequences of his actions. The two brothers, Stephen and Dan, quickly became the center of gossip. Their homes were empty, their marriages broken, and their reputations in ruins. The bitterness between them deepened. They blamed each other, argued frequently, and drifted further apart. What had started as a hidden affair had now ignited conflict between families, turning brother against brother. The village watched silently, judging, waiting for the next scandal to unfold. Life in the village changed as the story spread. People whispered behind the brothers' backs, shaking their heads at how quickly everything had fallen apart. Stephen tried drowning his regrets in alcohol, while Dan walked around with heartache etched across his face. Their homes, once lively, were now quiet and empty. The women they loved were gone. The children they cared for were taken away. Neighbors who once respected them now saw them as cautionary tales. The rivalry between the two men escalated as they accused each other of causing their downfall. They argued over trivial things, each unable to accept their own part in the destruction. What began as a forbidden affair had become a wildfire, consuming every connection between them. In the midst of the chaos, the village learned a harsh lesson. Betrayal does not simply hurt the people involved, it tears through families and communities like a storm. Time passed, but the damage remained. Stephen realized too late that losing Sophie meant losing the only real foundation he had. Dan, too, struggled to rebuild his life without Kimberly and the twins. Both men carried regrets heavier than any burden they had known. The village quieted down, but the scars stayed visible on their reputations and relationships. The story served as a warning to others. Loyalty, gratitude, and love are delicate threads that can unravel with a single wrong choice. A home is not held together by walls, but by trust. When that trust breaks, rebuilding becomes nearly impossible. The brothers eventually came to understand that betrayal is not just a moment. It is a chain reaction that destroys homes, friendships, and generations. In the end, only one truth remained. A family without loyalty is like a house built on sand. destined to collapse under its own weight. Months passed, and slowly the bitterness between Stephen and Dan began to fade. They were tired of fighting, of blaming, of carrying wounds that refused to heal. One quiet evening, the two brothers finally sat together under the old mango tree behind their childhood home. No shouting, no accusations, just silence, then honesty. They spoke about their mistakes, their pain, and the families they lost. For the first time, they listened to each other. That conversation marked the beginning of change. Stephen stopped drinking and sought help from elders in the village. Dan started working with a local youth group, teaching young men about responsibility and respect. Though their marriages did not return, peace did. Sophie and Kimberly moved on, healing in their own ways, while the brothers rebuilt their dignity and brotherhood. In time, the village no longer whispered about their downfall, but admired their transformation. They learned that redemption is possible, even after deep mistakes, when a man chooses truth, humility, and change.